Today on Stronger Than Reason, we revisit vintage New Order with their third album, 1985's Low Life. Welcome to Stronger Than Reason. Well, it's been nearly 20 episodes since I last touched New Order, so it's time to get back to them. And if you haven't guessed, I'm planning shows in a more or less fractal manner. I'm saving the big round numbers for music-adjacent topics, and bands with a lot of records pop up every 15 episodes or so, and I fill in the rest with lesser-known stuff or stuff that doesn't quite fit in with everything else. So it's kind of like the Factory Records catalog, if you think about it, which had a similarly periodic structure. In fact, if someone hasn't already made a periodic table of Factory catalog numbers, they should do that. I think I did talk about the catalog at length in episode 44, which was all about New Order's second album, Power, Corruption, and Lies. So I won't rehash that discussion here, but I do see a parallel. So when I hit episode 50, I sort of hit a wall idea-wise, I'll admit it. For a minute, I thought maybe this show had run its course, but somehow the number of topics since then has just exploded, and my to-do list is once again as long as ever, kind of like my to-do list at work or in real life. So for some of those ideas, I have to thank those of you who wrote in to request certain topics. Rest assured, if you suggested it, it's on my list, even if I haven't listened to it yet. And, provided we're spared an asteroid hit, I'll get to it, all of it eventually. And I've mentioned from time to time here that New Order is or was one of my favorite bands in the sense that I've spent an inordinate amount of time collecting their stuff, especially in the 90s. And I still have quite a collection, and also in that I spend a lot of time listening to them. They're in the running for the band I've listened to the most, maybe rivaled only by Rush, a band who New Order have almost nothing in common with. Rush were not only more prolific, but they also inspired a sense of nerd loyalty that was far beyond anything New Order fans could ever aspire to. That said, I am still a huge fan of Rush, but I am not a fan of the current incarnation of New Order. Let's face it, New Order as it is today is just a stale relic, a shadow of their former selves. To paraphrase Roger Waters, they are a spent creative force. Because to me, New Order has been diluted beyond recovery, missing as they are their distinctive bass player, Peter Hook, whose phased-out, high-octave playing did indeed lend the band a unique sound. They still have singer-guitarist Bernard Sumner and the other two, Gillian Gilbert and Stephen Morris, plus a couple others who I still consider to be the new guys. But without Hooky, let's face it, the magic is gone, and to wit, they've only recorded one new album since his departure in 2007. And I have not listened to it, frankly. To me, it's not really New Order. It may as well be a similar but different band or a side project like Electronic or, Bad Lieutenant maybe. Folks on here have told me that it was good and that it holds up to their earlier work. And that's fair enough. But to me, it's still a different band despite the name. Today's New Order is little more than maybe the world's most credible New Order cover band, with Hooky's project, Peter Hook and the Light, running a close second. The difference being that Peter's band likes to dig really deep into the catalog, bringing life to the really deep cuts, while the other three prefer to play the same dozen or so songs over and over again. And, I wonder what's changed. Maybe the missing ingredient these days is tension. And here I'm thinking of Skinny Puppy, another band that New Order has very little in common with. That band thrived on tension between the two principal members, Kevin Key and Nivek Ogre, who by all accounts never really got along very well. Their differing perspectives just pulled the music in opposing ways, which paradoxically made it stronger, like metal undergoing annealing. And the more they fought and argued, the better the music seemed to get. Now, in New Order, Barney and Hooky were often at each other's throats, with their manager, the late great Rob Gretton, often throwing his own fuel on the fire, not to mention factory label boss Tony Wilson, or factory's brilliant but idiosyncratic in-house producer Martin Hannett. Really, if you think about it, back in Factory's heyday, there was no shortage of weird characters generating conflict, and I'd argue that it all went into the pot to make the music stronger, to give it an edge. To me, that edge just ain't there anymore, and in fact, it would all but disappear from their music in the mid-90s, never to return. But that's me. You may have a very different take on your own New Order fandom, and I'm not laying down any absolutes here, just sharing my own opinion. As a random guy on the internet, take it for what you will, or just, ignore me completely. That's what my kids do, and I'm used to it. Fortunately, I can always go back to the good stuff, and what I consider the good stuff anyway. The vintage New Order, in short, their first 5 studio albums, and we've talked about 3 so far, if you recall. Their first album, Movement, in episode 54, and then Power, Corruption, and Lies in episode 44, and we jumped way ahead to my favorite, the 5th album, Technique, way back in episode 27. So yes, I'm anything but chronological. But wait a minute, I hear you asking, what about Substance? Well, of course, that wasn't a studio album, despite having a couple new tracks on it. It wasn't even a best of. Substance was a singles compilation, the first of many as it would turn out. So I'm not counting it here, but I did talk about Substance way back in episode 3, barely audible though that episode is. And of course, we have New Order's prior incarnation as Joy Division as well. So far I talked about 2 of their releases, their debut album, Unknown Pleasures, in episode 46, and their Odds and Ends compilation, Still, in episode 17. So there's still more Joy Division to cover here too, in time. Naturally, like any New Order fan worth their salt, I consider all of the Joy Division material to be sacrosanct, and needless to say, I will cover it all and will give it its proper reverence. I even imagine that eventually I'll cover some of the early side projects like Electronic, which was Barney with Johnny Marr, or Revenge, which was Hooky with some friends, and even the other 2, which was just Steven and Jillian making some pristine electronic pop. So there is a lot to dig into, even if I disregard New Order's later career after Factory imploded in 1992. And going along with this fractal approach to scheduling, it's probably enough material to keep me going to at least episode 150. For now, though, I want to focus on New Order's 3rd album, which was, of course, called Low Life. Here it is. Factory released it in 1985 as catalog number FAC 100, and in their own fractal way, they reserved all the multiples of 25 for their most important band, New Order. Now, what was going on with the band at this point? Well, in short, they were on a creative high, having recently shed the mantle of Joy Division. As we discussed, while Movement shadowed their former band quite closely, Power, Corruption, and Lies pushed them ahead into new territory, and their blockbuster single, Blue Monday, launched them into the fore of electronic dance music, which was precisely where they wanted to be. In fact, ever since their initial tour of New York City in 1981, when they visited all the hot clubs of the day and imagined making music worthy of those clubs playing. Indeed, they had toured the world by 1985, if by the world you meant the UK, Europe, and North America. And, the joke, of course, is that any band is quick to call it a world tour as soon as they touch 2 continents. Although, strangely, they never seem to touch Africa, Asia, or South America, let alone Antarctica. Anyway, so with a new, fresh identity and armed with the latest electronic music gear, they started writing the next batch of songs. And Rob Gretton, their manager, was fond of reminding them, as he laid on the couch smoking a joint, that their best song probably hadn't been written yet, so they should get to it. And indeed they did. And the results are on this album. And what a curious album it is. It packs a lot into a little. It's just 8 tracks and is over and done in 40 minutes. And NASA assures me that that's an average song length of 5 minutes. Interesting, at least 2 of these songs were drastic edits from much longer versions. And those versions would be made available either on subsequent singles or later releases. So it's a bit odd that they didn't include more material here on the album. They kept all the songs really short. But there is a lot to dig into here, but let's start with the title of the album. What does it mean? Well, it turns out it's from a barely audible sample that occurs in the beginning of the 3rd track, which is called This Time of Night. It's a sample of Jeffrey Bernard, who was a UK music columnist, and he's saying, I quote, "I'm one of the few people who lives what's called a low life," unquote. And you can barely hear it just before the opening beats. And word on the street was, and by word on the street I mean in the old ceremony mailing list, that he tried to sue the band for including his voice, so they half-heartedly recorded over him. But you can still hear it if you turn the volume all the way up, like I do. And that's why the album is called Low Life. So what's up with the artwork? Now, what I have here is the US edition from Quest Records, so the packaging is very inferior. And if I open this up, we can look and see that it's just a 3-panel fold-out, and each panel here has one band member on it. We have Steven on the main cover, and then Hooky and Barney. So where's Jillian? Well, she's on the back cover here. So the original Factory UK edition had each member on an interchangeable cardboard panel, and the band name was on a piece of translucent paper, naturally. So it was a bit of a DIY thing where you could put your favorite band member on the front. And this, of course, was the result of it being over-designed by the great Peter Saville, who is the eccentric designer who crafted all of New Order's sleeves. And, you know, the joke here on this album cover is that the band had spent their career to this point being pretty faceless, never appearing on their records, and that went all the way back to the Joy Division days. In fact, they didn't do many interviews either. Their record sleeves would famously not include the band name or even the release title. Power, Corruption, and Lies is a great example of that, as we discussed, and for that one, you had to solve a substitution cipher to decode the band name and album title. So it's pretty funny that on the very next release, we're showcasing the band's faces. And Saville chose Stephen Morris's portrait for the main cover because it had the best contrast, as you can kind of see here, and it's kind of visually striking. And it's also a little funny since Stephen is maybe the quietest member of the group, maybe next to Jillian, both pretty quiet compared to the others. So suddenly, Stephen's face is on all the marketing. So it's funny on a couple of levels. And again, I just can't overemphasize how crappy the Quest packaging is compared to the factory originals in almost every case. And that gripe extends to the vinyl, as we discussed in the Technique episode. All the US vinyl that I've seen is cheap and thin, sometimes even without a record liner, while the UK is on nice thick vinyl with extra care taken on the liner and other packaging elements. So, you know, as a collector, I used to try to hunt down the UK versions of all this stuff as much as I could. Obviously, I failed here. So I swore to myself I'd do my best to not let this episode be longer than the actual album at 40 minutes. So I'm going to jump right into the track by track. So the lead-off track here is a strong one, Love Vigilantes, and it's a pretty straightforward rock number. You got Steven behind the drum kit, Barney playing his melodica, and it has very unusual lyrics. You know, Barney's lyrics tend to be abstract to the point of meaninglessness, which I've mentioned a lot, but here he's telling a story about a guy going off to war and coming back. It's corny, but it's unique in this way, and it is a pretty strong rock track. So as a result, it is a bit of a fan favorite, and it was covered by a score of other bands, according to Wikipedia, which, as we know, is the next best thing to learning something. Of those, the only one that I was aware of as a kid was the cover by Poi Dog Pondering. and their version is pretty faithful. It's kind of bouncier. You can check it out online. You'll notice that they use an accordion rather than a melodica, so, take that as you will. Next up, we have the perennial classic, The Perfect Kiss. The first time, in fact, that a New Order single appeared on one of their albums. And you kind of wonder why that is. But regardless, it almost doesn't matter because here you're only getting a brief radio edit of what we know on 12-inch is a masterpiece that is 8 minutes, 46 seconds long. And this album version just chops out over 3.5 minutes of that. They just butchered it, plain and simple. This edit here skips the third verse entirely and has the nerve to fade out over the epic ending jam. So, in my opinion, don't even waste your time with this version. Go listen to the 12-inch mix. As for the song itself, I talked about it a lot in the Substance episode, one of my top 5 New Order songs ever. It's got an incredibly complex arrangement, at least for this band, and just a lot of different moods and styles thrown in there. Just an amazing song. I like this song so much, I even attempted to cover it myself. It was actually the first thing I ever recorded on my little home studio rig whenever I got my first computer in 2006. And, it wasn't my greatest effort in retrospect, but I do still love this song. And the video, which shows the band simply playing it in their practice room, it was just a mind blower to me because prior to that, I had never actually seen this band, like who they were. I've never saw them play their instruments. So it was my first window into that. I really had no idea prior to that what they were doing to make music that sounded like this. So I had recorded the video to The Perfect Kiss off MTV, watched it 1,000 times, just devoured that video, and ended up looking for more videos of them playing, which were hard to come by in the early 90s. And I did find it. I did find some of that, as we will soon see. But for now, let's move on to track 3, This Time of Night, an electronic track by and large. I think Steven is playing the drum kit here, judging from how they played it live. The low end is really cool here. It's this cool arpeggiated bass line. It just sounds huge and awesome. Hooky is providing a lot of your higher register bass riffs as he does. It's just a great song. It really comes together well. I think the chorus is memorable and catchy. The whole thing is kind of a little aggressive and minor key. The only thing that really puts me off at all here is this recurrent hand clap effect. And I think they overuse that sound on this album, in my opinion. Like, you don't need a lot of obviously electronic hand claps. I don't know. I think this track would be perfect without the hand clap. That's the one thing I'd change. Just great vocals, keyboards, drums, bass riffing, an excellent New Order song all around. And side 1 winds up with Sunrise. From the opening low synth notes, this song's going to be dark and aggressive, and it really delivers. This is a serious rock song led by Hooky's bass, and it's just a furious song, and it's a good example of how Barney's crazy guitar playing fits in and how he relies more on rhythm than like traditional soloing. Because when he's playing a solo, he's basically just playing rhythm guitar really fast. He's just strumming it like a madman. And he does that here a lot. And I think his vocals are outstanding here. It's probably one of the best songs he's sung because to me, it almost sounds like he's Robert Smith on this track. To be honest, the way he sings this song, and I do mean that as a compliment, listen to it and tell me what you think, especially the first few lines of the songs. It could be a Cure song. The chorus on this song, no words, but it's super loud and powerful. Just, what can I say? I have nothing to criticize here on Sunrise. Just another cool song. And one thing I do like about this song, though, is how it has an actual ending. It doesn't just fade out, which I find really lazy. I like songs to have an actual ending. In this song, it does sort of peter out. And at the very end, if you listen very carefully, you hear a single chime. which is really classy. So then that leads us into side two, which starts with a very unusual song indeed, Elegia. And as the title might suggest, it is a slow instrumental. It's in waltz time, no less, all minor key, of course. It does have a little bit of drumming, but the drums that are here are really for effects. So it's not unlike an orchestral piece in that sense. You know, I just have this mental picture of Stephen behind a bunch of timpanis or something with a big cymbal and just playing everything with mallets. I don't think that's really what happened, though. But this is the other song here besides The Perfect Kiss that first existed as a much longer piece, because the full version of Elegia is 17 and a half minutes long, and it wouldn't be released until the Retro compilation in 2002. And later they would include it in the 2008 re-release of Low Life, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. Overall, you know, this is a powerful, moving piece. It's very atmospheric. And I think it's an effective stopgap between what are otherwise a bunch of electronic rock songs on this album. And I've read that this was meant to be a memorial to their lost singer, Ian Curtis, but really, you know, it's an instrumental, so it means whatever you want it to mean. Next up, we have Sooner Than You Think, you know, following that great tradition of early New Order songs that never give songs a name that's related in any way to the lyrics. This is a cool song. I always liked it for one reason, and the reason is that the intro is very long and very complex. And kind of like The Perfect Kiss in that way. They're similar in that sense. But I think it really showcased the band's inventiveness. It's a full minute and 10 seconds before you hear any vocals. And in that time, the song changes direction like 4 or 5 times. And by then, you just have no idea where it's going. And I love that about it. I think it's surprising and interesting. And it finally settles into like a mid-tempo rocker with Steven behind the kit and Hooky bringing the riffs. So very much a characteristic New Order song for the time, apart from the crazy intro, but a cool song nonetheless. And on we go to Subculture. This is very much a synth-based song based on a repeating arpeggio, and they'd pull it as the second single from the album following The Perfect Kiss. And it would be a weird single indeed. The 12-inch is pretty much a complete re-recording mixed by their frenemy, John Roby, who'd controversially bring in female backup vocalists on the 12-inch. You know, this is the version that most people are familiar with from Substance. And, you know, fans would be greatly divided on whether Roby should be hung from his fingernails or merely boiled in oil. I myself could see the pros and cons of the album and 12-inch mixes. I think the album mix is a lot more primitive, in my opinion, almost like Barney hasn't even settled on the lyrics. And it kind of suffers from him trying to jam too many words in. It just doesn't scan very well. And he would re-record the vocals for the 12-inch, so that's one thing they improved. The other thing that's interesting about this single is that it's really the only regular New Order single from Factory Records that was not issued with a Peter Saville sleeve. In fact, it really had no sleeve at all, just a plain black die-cut sleeve. And at first, the rumor mill said that it was because Peter hated the remix so much that he refused to design a cover. But actually, Peter's on record saying that as far as he can remember, one was never requested, so he just didn't bother doing it. So, yeah, not sure what to believe there. By the way, just as a complete side note, if you read Hooky's memoir, Substance Inside New Order, which is a great read, by the way, you will learn that Hooky did not get along with John Roby at all. And he tells some pretty insane stories about back and forth pranks that they pulled on each other. I guess Hooky yanked a chair out from under Roby, and Roby retaliated, you know, in a way that we can all understand and relate to, because he made Hooky look silly in front of Kate Pearson of the B-52s. So yeah, you know, we've all been there. But Hooky and Roby, not about to go fishing together. So finally we wrap things up with Face Up, song 8. Not much to say about this one. It's kind of a upbeat, jaunty, sort of major key tune. It's got a lot of Barney's whoops in it and a lot of his corny lyrics and terrible grammar. Here's an example. Your hair was long, your eyes was blue. Guess what I'm gonna do to you? Great. Does have a good guitar solo from Jillian, though. Sweet drumming from Steven. Good energy in the song. And despite the lyrics, I do dig it. And that's the album, folks, clocking in at just over 40 minutes. Short and very sweet. Now, they did reissue this several times, first in 2008 with an 8-track bonus disc of B-sides and outtakes, like the aforementioned long version of Elegia, the Subculture 12-inch and its B-side Dub Vulture, and the 12-inch version of The Perfect Kiss, unedited, unlike the version on Substance, which is in fact an edit. And strangely, they also included a few tracks of incidental music the band did for Beth B's 1988 movie Salvation. And I don't know why those were included here, seeing as New Order wrote those songs 3 years after Low Life, but I don't know, maybe they were just looking for some more filler for that bonus disc. Then last year, 2023, they did come out with the so-called Definitive Edition, which was a bit more interesting since it included rough mixes from the Low Life sessions and even a few untitled random jams, which were actually pretty cool. You can check those out online. Did I pick up any of those reissues? No, I did not. And I'll tell you why. Because by the mid-90s, I was sick of London Records scraping the New Order Joy Division barrel. Because every year they'd release a new compilation. You had the best of, the rest of, singles, international, retro, total, etc., etc. And I'm sure it was their futile attempt to recoup some dough after acquiring this band that, for whatever reason, didn't want to record or tour. And all of those collections would always have one exclusive track or mix in an effort to get the punters to shell out again and again, not to mention thousands of crap remixes by No Hope or DJs. So I just bailed on all that, and I really never bought any of the reissues or repackages or rehashes. I just prefer instead to listen to the original recordings and keep my money. I think I first heard Low Life around 1992 or so when I began systematically picking up all of New Order's stuff. And I gotta say I liked it right from the start, which I can't say about all their early albums. I think Movement had to grow on me quite a bit. But I did like Low Life even more after finding this, a live New Order video called Pumped Full of Drugs. And I picked this up at an independent record store in the big city back in the day when I was in college. Gotta say that store was just a land of wonder for suburban kids like me who were looking for hard-to-find stuff. And it just kind of fed my desire to scour every record store I could find, pretty much. But yeah, this is a bootleg. This is actually a plastic VHS slipcase into which someone dropped a Xerox copy of the original video sleeve. You kind of have to admire the gall of them doing that. But regardless, I bought this thing immediately and took it home and watched this video hundreds of times. It was an official factory release as FAC 177, although here it's actually mislabeled as FAC 150, which is silly because everyone knows FAC 150 was their fourth album, Brotherhood, so that's a mistake. This, by the way, is a bootleg copy of the Columbia video edition of Pumpful of Drugs, because the original factory sleeve was a whole lot nicer than this. Anyway, this is a video that Tony Wilson himself directed of the band's performance in Japan at the Kosei Nenkin Hall in Tokyo on May 2nd, 1985. And naturally, this show is available on the interwebs now if you want to go and check it out and you don't happen to have a VCR handy and this sweet VHS bootleg. It's funny because I also managed to find, when I was scouring all those record stores a copy of this show on CD as this further pumped bootleg. It's precisely the same set list. The audio is just cleaned up a whole lot over my terrible VHS copy. And, looking at the set, let's look here. You can see that most of the tracks are from Low Life. So we have Love Vigilantes, Subculture, Face Up, Sunrise, This Time of Night, and they're all from Low Life. And the other tracks that are on here are Confusion, which was a non-album single, of course, released in the summer of '83. It was a one-off collaboration between New Order and Arthur Baker that they did in New York. And here, in this performance, the band puts more of a pop structure on Confusion, which on 12-inch is a lot more rambling. There's an absolutely killer version of We All Stand on here. I went into extreme detail on that point in the Power, Corruption, and Lies episode, so I don't want to rehash it here too much, but to suffice to say, this version of We All Stand is just a definitive, amazing take of this song, in my opinion. If you disregard everything else I'm saying and are interested at all in New Order, please do check out this live version of We All Stand. It's out on YouTube. And then we have As It Is When It Was, which wouldn't see the light of day until the following year in 1986 on Brotherhood. So by performing it here, the audience was getting a bit of a sneak peek. And finally, the set closer, Blue Monday, of course, which sounds weirdly and crazily different here, probably due to them playing it live with different equipment or different settings, or, it was very much a studio creation in the original version. So it was interesting to see them try to perform it live. And that's the show. I've watched this hundreds of times as a kid. So this old copy, which was probably a fifth generation copy to start with, is pretty worn out. So I was glad to find the audio, at least on this CD. Again, this is all on YouTube now, thank Jeebus. But it was a funny show to watch. Besides the music, there were a few other funny things about it. One, the Japanese audience is characteristically very polite, to the point of barely applauding for the songs or making any noise whatsoever, which clearly irks Barney, because he spends a lot of the time between songs making snide comments like, "I'm spending an awful lot of money on guitar picks, so I wish you'd applaud louder." And he's just generally getting more and more mad and acting like a bastard through the whole set, which the rest of the band members and crew just sort of take in stride. So to them, that's just what he did on stage. And I also think it's funny that Tony Wilson went along in this trip. This was a guy who was never around when anyone needed a royalty check, but a junket to Japan to produce a video? Oh, yeah, he's first in line. So yeah, it's funny. A great performance, though, a great show. The sound is good. The video is well done. And, again, it gave me a much-needed window into who this band were and how they did what they did. It was just fascinating to me to watch them make this music. And it still is, really. See, I think we got through all that fairly quickly. I think I'm still maybe under my target time here. Why do I love this album? In short, it's tight. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's a varied listen with New Order. Their strongest material, I think, in these early days, it was always on their singles. And here they did include versions of 2 singles, albeit edited somewhat. And it's enough to make this album attractive and familiar to a fan who's only ever seen Substance. And, the band were on a creative high. In 8 years, they released 5 albums, plus another 2 albums worth of singles, all of them classics. And take that with their nonstop touring, plus trying to get their nightclub, the Hacienda, off the ground. It was just a tremendous amount of great work in a short time that had a huge impact on the music industry and culture in general. I think Low Life especially is a nearly seamless blend of their 2 main ingredients, electronics and rock. And that was increasingly true through Movement and Power, Corruption, and Lies, and maybe reached a peak here. I think it would be less true on future albums, at least the next 2, classic as those might be. I would argue that Low Life would be New Order's smoothest blend of those two things. And another thing I want to point out about this album is that it's self-produced, and it sounds fantastic. So I'm with Hookie when I say that New Order didn't need an external producer. I do think at that time they needed a therapist, maybe several. Maybe they each needed a therapist, but a producer, no. After all they learned from Martin Hannett, they were more than capable of producing themselves. The fact that they produced Low Life, such a classic album, is a testament to that. And, again, I think the stress they were under, the tensions in the group, the differing personalities, that all contributed to the songs on Low Life being really well done. And I love it for those reasons. And there you have it, folks. A concise episode, just like the album. That's New Order's third album, Low Life, one of their 5 classics from the 1980s, when they were still well ahead of the pack and doing no wrong. You're listening to Stronger Than Reason, either on YouTube or as an Apple or Spotify podcast. The show that's damn glad to be out of the hot and humid portion of summer and into fake fall. Bring on sweater weather, and also bring on the day that it gets so cold that all the mosquitoes snuff it. That's what I'm really looking forward to. As Calvin said, bugs are dying by the truckload. Good riddance to 'em all. As always, thank you for listening, and until next time, stay strong.